Okay, now again, we are now in part four of possibly 6 or 8 sections of the title. The first shall be last, the last shall be first, and we left off at we left off at verse 24. Um, we're going to go back into just kind of like giving you a little recap of everything here. That verse 37, Joseph had this dream. In verse 30, excuse me, chapter 37, he had the dream. Chapter 39, he had favor after he was sold into slavery. Chapter 40, he was in prison and gave the dreams to the cupbearer and the baker. After 2 years of being locked up, Pharaoh had a troubling dream in chapter 41 and called for someone to interpret the dream. And that's where we at now. We in chapter 41. So just kind of give you up to date. This was a very long um, message, but I wanted to drive in the importance. I think it's very important that each one of these chapters, verse 37 and then 39 through 45, be addressed because they're very important. There's a lot of things in there that I don't want to just skip over for the sake of just creating a message. I really want this to be a good insightful teaching that we can grasp the meat of Joseph's story in the Bible. So in chapter 41, we're there. We're going to start with verse 25. It said, Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, The dreams of Pharaoh are one and the same. God has revealed to Pharaoh what he is about to do. The 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads of grain are 7 years. It is the one and the same dream. The 7 lean, ugly cows that came up afterward are 7 years, and are so the 7 worthless heads of grain scorched by the east wind. There are 7 years of famine. It is just as I said to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. 7 years of great abundance are coming throughout the land of Egypt, but 7 years of famine will follow them. Then all the abundance in Egypt will be forgotten, and the famine will ravage the land. The abundance in the land will not be remembered because the famine that follows it will be so severe. The reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. So Joseph basically telling him what this dream is. Although you had 2 dreams, portion of both of those dreams are dealing with good, plentiful years, 7 plentiful years, and then the last portion of them dream is going to be the famine that we're going to go through. And he said that the reason the dream was given in 2 forms is God firmly decided, basically saying confirmation. And we know as believers, that's what God does. God knows how to confirm through backing up. 2 is the number of witnesses. It's the confirmation. And so that's what Joseph was saying. But he broke down these dreams to Pharaoh, you know, and just told him. And basically, again, as I've said in other parts that I've spoke on this was the economy. This was the economy of Egypt that was finna be attacked. The only thing that wasn't attacked in this was the water. But you see where the food was being attacked. That was the animals and the agriculture. So agriculture as a whole was being attacked. And I want to just kind of like point out the state of our economy and things that we're affected. And there's other parts of the world that are affected as well. But we can look here in this so-called flourishing country of America, and we can look at the crazy things that's going on in the political world, the fights between these ungodly men on either side, and who's suffering in the middle of all the battles, the political battles, it's the people. And so again, us as believers, there are things that we just have to do. Again, I've talked and I've said it again. I'm gonna keep saying it while I'm teaching this message, that there are apostles and bishops and preachers and prophets today that are speaking and encouraging and warning believers to get out of debt, that stop getting ourselves in so much debt, wrapped up in debt, buying, getting caught up in the world system. It's okay to have, but right now there's things that the prophecies are saying, and men and women having dreams showing where this country is finna go through some things. COVID-19 was terrible for us. That was a time like I've never seen in my 59 years of living, where the whole world shut down, and we had all these crazy people denying and want to, make it conspiracy theories, but people were dying. There's no way around it. People were dying, whether you for or against the vaccine or whatever. People were dying, and they were dying by the thousands, the tens of thousands. And I know in my lifetime I've never seen that. So we have to be wise, and understand the state of where we are. We need to have our fasting and our prayer life together. So here again, I'm gonna get back into this here, but Joseph, beginning to tell Pharaoh about these dreams he had. Joseph didn't even get into the details about how he was sold into slavery, and did all of this stuff here that he went through. It's just like sometimes the enemy can use our people, as we as African Americans, the things that we endured. Doesn't make it right what we went through, the African slave trades and all of that stuff that took place with our ancestors and things like that. But we have to be careful too that even in looking at these things, not all Caucasians or people that was involved were wrong. There were people that helped us throughout history. So, we shouldn't stereotype entire ethnicities over things, and that's on whatever side that may be. Harriet Tubman couldn't have done the things that she did. There are a lot of people that we don't even know about that helped Dr. King and them that was of Caucasian race and things like that that were against it. So it wasn't an entire race. We don't want to wipe out an entire race of nothing. We shouldn't be stereotyping anyway, But again, here Joseph is not even talking about the fact of what he went through. God is just using him in such a miraculous way. So in verse 33 it says, "And now let Pharaoh look for discerning and wise men and put them in charge of the land of Egypt. Let Pharaoh appoint commissioners over the land to take a fifth of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. They should collect all the food of the good years that are coming up and store up the grain under the authority of Pharaoh to be kept in the cities for food. The food should be held in reserve for the country to be used during the 7 years of famine that will come upon Egypt, so that the country may not be ruined by the famine." So God, in his foreknowledge, God even knows what's about to happen. Yes, he could step in and stop it, but God does allow us to have our will too. But yet God is able to give warning. And see, one thing we have to understand is that for us that believe, those that don't believe, really don't care what you think about this. But for those that are believers, we understand that when sin came into the world with Adam and Eve, these things began to happen. Well, we gave up some of our ability to control. And so now there are things that we have to deal with on this earth because of the fall of man in the Garden of Eden. There are things that are just going to befall us. It doesn't mean that God can't stop them, but we tied God's hands to certain things now because of this. And so here God is able to give us foreknowledge. Not that he couldn't stop it, but he gave us foreknowledge of the things that were going to come. And Joseph and them knew that this famine was coming. Okay, so God, he knew that, and so he began to give Pharaoh instructions. Now the plan seemed good to Pharaoh and all his officials. That's verse 37. It says, "So Pharaoh asked them, 'Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom the Spirit of God?' Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, 'Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you.'" Wow. Pharaoh just gave a man of another ethnicity, another nation, told him that basically he's going to be like a vice Pharaoh. I'm going to put everything under you in Egypt except me and my throne. So because of what he did, God saw the favor. Excuse me, Pharaoh saw the favor in him, and he used it. He used the term. He said, "In whom the spirit of the God." So he even knew that something supernatural had to be in place for this man here. That Joseph was doing something beyond a natural man's ability, and even the wise, so-called wise men that they had at the time, which was nothing but a bunch of phony psychics and seers and all that other stuff. But they couldn't even they couldn't even give dreams like this here. Pharaoh never even elevated them, as we know of, never elevated them to anything. Well, we know he didn't put them in anything over Egypt because he just gave it to Joseph. So you see how God was even taking this man that was falsely in prison as a young boy, and then many, many years in slavery. Now he's grown and living in the house of Pharaoh, living up in lavish life now, and God just using him to his ability. Okay, again, Joseph, excuse me, Pharaoh recognizing that Joseph was operating in this supernatural ability, that even these false psychics and false prophets, I'm gonna use psychic because they wasn't called psychics then, it was wise men, so called, they called them magicians and things like that. They couldn't even interpret those things. And and I want to just focus on that, that Pharaoh, excuse me, was even saying that there's, he can't even find anyone like this man in whom is the spirit of God. Even I can remember with Daniel got the name from one of the wicked kings then, Belteshazzar. That which means, it's the wording of it means something like the spirits of God is with him. So even these unsaved, these nations that didn't know God. I'm gonna say it that way. We know. I don't want to confuse anybody with salvation at that time or whatever. But anyway, they knew that it was something about him, that there had to be supernatural ability with Daniel and his dream interpretation. And here it is with Joseph, that they're saying that the spirit of God, this man had to have some kind of power to do these things. So that, and Pharaoh put Joseph over everything, including even the jailer who Joseph once served under. So God know how to bring us from meagerness. He know how to take us out of situations, bitterness, hardship, and he can take us to royalty. God can cause us to be in places where we never been before, the places that we never thought we would go, positions that we would never have. You know, God placed this Hebrew man over his whole nation, a Hebrew that was not even Egyptian. He put him over the entire nation. And it always make me wonder about Miss Potiphar, the one that did this lying. Wonder whatever happened to her during this whole time. Now, scripture doesn't say it, and I'm not going to try to put no scripture or some kind of interpretation or something on what happened to her, but it would be curious. I really would love to know what she thought about all this here. Okay, God done use you mightily, and these gifts, that Joseph have, God working through him. There's a scripture in Matthew chapter 5 verse 16 where Jesus said, "Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven." So to let us see that, that people can see the Christ through us and then glorify the Father. So verse 41 says, "So Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the whole land of Egypt." Then Pharaoh took his signet ring from his finger and put it on Joseph's finger. He dressed him in robes of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. He had him ride in a chariot as second in command, and people shouted before him, "Make way." Thus he put him in charge of the whole land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, "I am Pharaoh, but without your word, no one will lift hand or foot in all Egypt." Pharaoh gave Joseph the name Zephnath-Paneah, and gave him Asintha, daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, to be his wife. And Joseph went throughout the land of Egypt. So now Pharaoh is giving Joseph the cream of the crop. He gave him his ring, he gave him his royalty, and he telling him that he's the second in charge. When he came through, the people shouted. Okay, so now here, and what I want you to look at is, here's a Hebrew in an Egyptian land that's doing all of this here for people that's not even of his own nation. And yet they're being elevated. So you can see how God can elevate them. Something that started out tragic with this young boy, his whole life appeared to be gone, locked up in prison falsely, or left for dead by his own family members, and then sold into slavery. And yet now he's, if I can use the term, the Prince of Egypt. Okay, now he's running everything in Egypt, and on subject only to Pharaoh. Pharaoh commanding everything. Now Pharaoh is even giving them, the priests were very popular and royalty men of those times, because they offered up whatever the gods that they served and everything. But here, Joseph was given, Asintha, the daughter of Potiphar, who was a priest of On. Okay, in these areas. So priests they were highly looked upon. So I mean, so you're talking about royalty here, and I don't we don't read anywhere here when Joseph had no issue with, well, she's not of my race, she's not of my ethnicity, you know, and we know that they had to, that these ladies were the cream of the crop, if I can say that and get away with that. So God used Pharaoh to elevate Joseph. God can choose whoever he want to use to bless you. He can have bosses. We some of us have been on jobs that we received jobs that we really wasn't qualified to do. We wasn't qualified to do these jobs, but yet God had mercy and touched the people. And sometimes they may have felt like, I don't even know why I'm giving you this job. You really don't meet the qualifications, but you get it and it wind up being a blessing. Okay. So now the name that Joseph was given to, I want to let you know that Zephaniah Paniel, it means revealer of secrets. So that's what Joseph's name means. And a lot of times in the Middle Eastern culture, we find that their names had meanings. They gave their children or they named people or things after things that had meaning. They just didn't come up with these old crazy names like we see today. And forgive me, I'm not bothering anybody, but we have all types of names today that just you wonder where these things come from. But these Eastern culture people, they had meanings. Their name meant something, and so Joseph getting a name that means revealer of the secrets. Which that's what he did. He was a revealer. So he got this wife, her father, who was an Egyptian priest. So again, like I say, there was some royalty. And really during the biblical times, we're going to read later where there was a lot of prohibition against intermarrying, only because, not because one race was better, but because of the gods that a lot of these nations hostile to the Hebrews served. God didn't want them to intermingle because he didn't want those things of their culture intermingling in the covenant that he had with the Hebrews. But let's look at Joseph here. So you see, we don't want to be so saved until we miss God, and like some people have lost, I believe, that have lost good opportunities for husband and wife being too picky. This one ain't for me. I'm looking for a man like this. I'm looking for a woman like this, and don't even think about their own issues you may have. Some people have prejudices, or now it's nothing wrong with having preference on who you want to marry. There's nothing wrong with that. Some people have too many set standards until they're going to always be single. They're always going to be waiting on Mr. Right or Miss Right, and you're going to miss them because you're too picky. Okay. It makes me think about a situation. I had a friend that was talking one time about what kind of man she wanted, and he had to do this and had to do that. And we was on a job, and he have to have this and that. And the first thing came out of my mouth was, "You part time. You work part time. How you want all this here? You want somebody to have all this, and you don't have it." What if he says that about you? Well, I want a woman that has this and want that. So, a lot of times, and I'm not saying we have to go out here and just desire some deadbeats or somebody that don't have any kind of drive, in their life. But come on, y'all, let's be real. Okay. So in verse 46, it says Joseph was 30 years old when he entered the service of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from Pharaoh's presence and traveled through Egypt. During the 7 years of abundance, the land produced plentifully. Joseph collected all the food produced in those 7 years of abundance in Egypt and stored it in cities. In each city, he put the food grown in the fields surrounding it. Joseph stored up huge quantities of grain, like the sand of the sea. It was so much that he stopped keeping records because it was beyond measure. And so we know when God bless us, God can do some things that God bless us way beyond measure. God put so much in us that he can just do over in abundance. And here Joseph is a smart man. Joseph knew, and Joseph was keeping inventory. Joseph was, I don't know how it may have been. Maybe it was measuring it, whatever the unit of measure and things that they were doing, but he was making sure he stored up. And then the smart thing is he wasn't just keeping it in one city. He had it in the different Egyptian cities, and that was covered by Egypt. So everybody was able to eat. And Joseph was a worker. You see, so he wasn't just sitting back prophesying and not doing anything. He was a worker. Okay. So when God bless, God know how to do things. He know how to bless everyone. And like I say, this was so much grain that was kept there. They couldn't even keep up. Joseph couldn't even keep up inventory. And I know then how they were doing things. They wasn't doing it like we do. I remember my forklift days where we had the first in the old forklift days, we had the handwriting everything. And then, the more modern times we had the scanners where we can go up and hit the barcodes and scan the inventory. But God was using Joseph miraculously. And as I was saying, with the forklift days, we got so much sophistication on how we inventory things. Okay, but and on the same thing with God, I mean, with Pharaoh exalting Joseph like he was, God can do us like that. God can give us leadership positions in whatever it may be in, and can use us just how he chooses to do it. God can bless us abundantly. And I just I'm a firm believer that God just doesn't bless us to have a lot of wealth and things like that just to store it up. I think that God gives us things to use. Much is given, much is required. We have a lot of people, and I'm just bothering the believers now, that believers that just have all this here stored up, and there's nothing wrong with, I believe, that saving, because we just a good example about storing up for days of adversity. But it's too many of us just having everything stored up, and we're not giving the ministry, we're not giving to the needy, we're not giving to the work of the ministry or ministries. So I think we have to remember too. Let's keep in mind that God give us things, he give us blessings and gifts to be used, not to store up. Okay. Now, verse 50 say, before the years of famine came, two sons were born to Joseph by Asina, daughter of Potipharah, priest of On. Joseph named his firstborn Manasseh and said, it is because God had made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household. So he named his son after his trials that he went through. The second son he named Ephraim and said, it is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering. So again, here we go. We're talking about names meaning something. Okay. So his two children that he named them about something about his life that always reminded him of something about his life. So although he engrafted himself in the Egyptian culture, he had the name. He may have married woman of the Egyptian culture. He named his sons. He kept, his sons had Hebrew names. So you see, Joseph still remembered where he came from. Although he may have been here and although he may have been elevated, he didn't forget where he come from. And that's something that we have to remember, that no matter how far God have taken us, no matter how much we may flourish in a land of strangers or whatever it may be, we still have to remember him. Don't forget God wherever he takes you. Don't forget him. Okay. Verse 53 says, the 7 years of abundance in Egypt came to an end. So now all the flourishing, all the glory, the hallelujah, the blessing times is gone. Now I say the 7 years of abundance have come to an end. Verse 54, and the 7 years of famine began. Just as Joseph had said, there was famine in all the lands, but in the whole land of Egypt, there was food. So see here. So out of everything that was going on, there was food in Egypt. Okay. When all Egypt began to feel the famine, the people cried to Pharaoh for food. Then Pharaoh told all the Egyptians, go to Joseph and do what he tells you. When the famine had spread over the whole country, Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold grain to the Egyptians. For the famine was severe throughout Egypt, and all the world came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe everywhere. So you see here now that everything, this now is not the glory part. Now here comes the trial. Everybody love the blessings. Now give me the money. I'm naming it and claiming it and all this good stuff. But now here comes the trial. Here comes when the bank account finna dry up. Here comes when the refrigerator, you can start seeing the back of the refrigerator. When the car is not on full 3/4 tank no more. Now it's riding on a quarter of a tank now. You know, now here comes the trial part. What you gonna do now? Now here comes the time that your faith is gonna be put to test. See, it's easy to live doing an abundance, but your faith is gonna be tested when you're in adversity. So this famine hit the land, and then Pharaoh even told him, go to Joseph. Everybody crying to Pharaoh. He said, go to Joseph. See, Pharaoh had just that much confidence. It wasn't a pass the buck type situation. He just had faith in what Joseph was doing. He knew Joseph was going to carry this out for his people. And this was a great responsibility, because if let's just think for a minute in a situation like this, if Joseph was wrong and predicted wrong, and they didn't store up this food and things like this, and his famine hit. We already talking about a Pharaoh that was angry at one time at his cupbearer and his baker, and the baker wound up losing his life. So you see, so there's great responsibility that comes with the anointings of God, you know. So let's keep that in mind. So again, the good days and the bad days, they're going to come. So we have to be able to help people and be a blessing. It's just like my wife, Queen Johnson, and now we have we have our cooking and we do catering, small catering, things like that. And my late grandmother, Bernice Douglas, she used to always call it our cooking ministry. She termed it a cooking ministry because a lot of the cooking that we were doing, we give away a lot of food, a lot of good dinners, meals, and things like that. We're not doing it. We have a for profit business, but we do a lot of it just out of the heart, just blessing people. Which the name of our business, not to throw it in there, but it's church folk. Y'all know we love to eat as church folks, but Lord gave us that. They gave us that name, church folks, and that's what we do. So we took on that, and God used that business to sustain us during the time when we faced a layoff a couple of years back from our union jobs. We were laid off, and so in the meantime that sustained us, and it still does to some extent. Okay, so God know how to drop ideas and businesses in your mind, But let's just keep everything in its perspective. Okay, let's go into chapter 42. Verse 1, it says, when Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, he said to his son, now Jacob, this is Joseph's father. He said to his sons, why do you just keep looking at each other? He continued, I have heard that there's grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy some for us so that we may live and not die. Then 10 of Joseph's brothers went to buy grain from Egypt. But Jacob did not send Benjamin, Joseph's brother, with the others because he was afraid that harm might come to him. So Israel's son were among those who went to buy grain, for there was famine in the land of Canaan. So now the daddy, the scene is dropping back to Joseph's father, and them when he's telling his sons that these boys, why y'all sitting there looking at each other, and basically saying, look, we got to get out here and get some food. What are y'all just sitting around here just twiddling your thumbs, looking at each other? Go down there in Egypt. I heard that there's something. Go buy some food. But this time he wouldn't let his new, and then this was a brother that came along after Joseph, long after Joseph. But and sometimes he's being called Israel here, and it's Jacob. But he's saying he's not letting his other son go. So he had some memories about Joseph. See, all he knows now is Joseph was killed, because that's what the brothers told him. That an animal had killed him. So this is all they know. So he just telling them, stop sitting around here. Let's go do some things. And so we sometimes can be guilty of just dragging our feet, not doing what we need to do and what we should be doing. We have to get out there and get something done. God give you something to do, go do it. Get up and work. Don't just sit back waiting on unemployment. Those things like that may be good, stamps and whatever may be good to sustain people. Those are things, thank God for them, because they sustain, but let's not have these things as a crutch. Let's not put all our confidence. We facing times now in our economy to where, people's checks are being cut off because of these politicians fighting, and trying to prove points and trying to please other people in charge and things like this, and who all are losing? The citizens. So, just something that we have to think about. Know who you put in office. Know who you put in office. Okay. Verse 6, now Joseph was the governor of the land, the person who sold grain to all his people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed to him with their faces to the ground. And as soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them, but he pretended to be a stranger and spoke harshly to them. Where do you come from? He asked. From the land of Canaan, they replied, to buy food. Although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. Then he remembered his dreams about them and said to them, you are spies. You have come to see where, where our land is unprotected. No, my lord, they answered. Your servants have come to buy food. We are all the sons of one man. Your servants are honest men, not spies. No, he said to them, you have come to see where our land is unprotected. So Joseph knew who they were. Now he finna have some fun with his brothers. Okay. And so now, he knew them. And so that's something we have to understand. Sometimes you have to be careful. We have to be careful. People do you wrong. Sometimes people have done people so wrong so much that they don't even realize who they are and what they've done to the person. They don't even know. They just so busy doing things and sometimes talking to the very people that they don't wrong sometimes. And everybody ain't friendly. Some people will kill you. So let's be careful about how we deal with people.